With pitchers and catchers reporting for work in Clearwater and elsewhere, it's a great time to talk a little baseball, and I'll do that with one of the very best, a Hall of Fame baseball writer, in fact, Jayson Stark. Jayson, welcome.
Chet, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, you've been covering baseball a long time, but do you still get more energized, come mid-February, knowing that the sport that you love and cover is starting up once again?
Yeah. You know what I always think when that confetti rains down on top of the Super Bowl champs? It's now baseball season, and my blood starts flowing differently. I can't explain it, but that's how life works for me.
I hear you. Hey, let's talk Phillies. They came within one NLCS win of a second straight trip to the World Series. And unless they make another move this spring, they're essentially running it back with the same group that ended last year. Should they have done more? Might they still do something between now and early April?
I think you'll see a couple small moves. I know there's all these rumors about them being the team that rescues Scott Boras on somebody like Cody Bellinger or Jordan Montgomery. I honestly don't see that unless something completely shocking develops. But I do think you'll see them add outfield depth and pitching depth. Other than that, you're exactly right. This is probably the quietest offseason in the history of Dave Dombrowski, which is saying something. And I actually asked Dave about this earlier in the winter. Is it a good idea to run it back? Because that's not been his history. And he basically said every team's different. And when I look at this team, I think we were good enough to win. Like privately, they think they were going to win the World Series if they just find a way to win one more game against the Diamondbacks. And then we're perceiving all of this differently. And then, he pointed out all the ways they could actually be better with the same group, starting with full season of a guy named Bryce Harper, which is a scary thing to contemplate. And then growth among young players, growth among the Alec Bohm, Brandon Marsh, Bryson Stott group, Orion Kirkring have a lot of excitement about. That's his thinking. I personally would not do that. I always feel like it's a good idea to inject new energy into the group. Guys who are hungry, who haven't been there and done that. But again, Dave's feeling is we haven't done it. We've gotten to the World Series 2 years ago, didn't win it. Thought we were going to get there last year, didn't win it. He thinks the hunger of the group is stronger than ever. So I think that explains it. Nevertheless, I would not have done this.
Well, they did retain Aaron Nola, and now Zach Wheeler is entering the last year of his original 5-year Phillies deal. The Phils do want to keep him, but he's 33 and reportedly wants some big money. So how do you see this playing out?
I'd be really surprised if they don't get this done this winter. I did not feel that way about Aaron Nola, but I do think that Zach Wheeler's different. You just said it. He's older. He's several years older than Aaron, and he's tested the market. He's cashed in. He's extremely comfortable with the Phillies from every standpoint, from geography to family to comfort level with the whole pitching group. He's only gotten better here. He's really close to the pitching coach. He's really close to Aaron Nola. I think everybody understands what it'll take. It'll be a really high number per year. It won't be a lot of years because of his age. And I think that really fits exactly the way Dave Dombrowski's thinking and John Middleton's thinking.
The center field job is Johan Rojas's to lose. He reportedly worked hard over the winter, put on a little muscle. Does he have a decent upside, do you think?
Well, he's a spectacular defender. He is so much fun to watch, just roam around center field, isn't he? The question is the offense. And look, I'll be honest. I'll kind of believe it when I see it. He's a really talented kid. When he was promoted, he was only supposed to be up in the big leagues for a week or two. And then he was so good defensively, it really changed the way they were thinking about him. I know they're encouraged about the offseason work he's done, but it's not just about swing mechanics with him. If you watch closely in that postseason, approach is the problem. The way baseball works right now, there's so much information in the game. And if you make up your mind to swing at the pitch before it is thrown, that doesn't work. And that's really the way he went about it the entire postseason. And what was it, 4 for 45? That's scary. And the highest percentage of chases of pitches outside the strike zone of anybody in the sport in the postseason. And so, again, this is so much more than swing mechanics. This is about pitch recognition, controlling at bats, having a better feel for what he's trying to do at the plate and what the pitchers are trying to do with him. I mean, like, I understand what they're thinking, but I think he's hard to trust right now. And there's really no plan B.
You mentioned Bryce Harper will be there on opening day, which is a great thing. Can we expect big years, you think, out of both Harper and Trey Turner?
Trey Turner is such a superior player to the guy that Philadelphia saw for 4 months. And, I think much as in the way that Nick Castellanos settled in, after he had a year to adjust to everything about Philadelphia, I think Trey will be the same. And Trey's a guy, he clearly chased too much. And this is a huge point of emphasis this spring, not just with him, but with the whole group. But, Trey Turner's chase rate on pitches outside the zone was, if I remember this right off the top of my head, 38%. At swing rate. That's shocking, because this was not his history before he got here. And like, he's wired to swing. He's not wired to walk, but I think there are ways to do it. He's got a much superior baseball IQ to what we saw. And I just think comfort level is going to be huge with him. And hey, a full season of Bryce Harper, I don't think we fully comprehended what that could be. Like, I've always thought Bryce had a 50 homer season in him. And if you look at the healthy portion of Bryce Harper's year, which is basically the final third of the season, it would project out over a full season to close to 50 homers and an 1,100 OPS. And if he does that for 6 months, he's the MVP, right? So, yep. That's like those two guys that you just mentioned are a big reason to think that there is offensive upside, and they were already one of the best offenses in the sport.
Two final things, Jason, both of them Hall of Fame related. You can guess what the second one is. But the first one, several former Phillies were on the 2024 Hall of Fame ballot. Billy Wagner just missed by 5 votes. A lot of Phils fans, though, debate whether Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley are worthy. Rollins still struggling to get a lot of support, but Utley had a pretty good debut on the ballot, 29%. Do Rollins and or Utley get in at some point?
I think Chase is going to get in. Last 30 years, the only player not tied to controversy who debuted at 28% or higher and who was not elected was Don Mattingly, who was literally 30 years ago. And I think if Don Mattingly were on the ballot today, he would get elected. So I think that portends good things for Chase. I think he's the perfect data-driven 2020s kind of candidate. I think we're out of necessity, we're starting to gravitate away from the old magic counting numbers. We don't have any 3,000 hit guys in the sport anymore. We don't have any 500 homer guys in the sport this year. It's amazing. And so that's going to force us to change the way we vote. And then in 2 years, a guy named Buster Posey comes on the ballot. Feels like a Hall of Famer, right? 1,500 career hits. Chase is in the 1,800s. And so there's always been kind of this blockade of hitters who don't have 2,000 hits getting elected. I think Buster Posey changes that narrative. So I think because of that, Chase gets in. It'll take him a while, but he will. And then the question is, does he elevate Jimmy Rollins along with him? I don't know the answer. I did notice something really interesting, Chet, after this election, in which Chase's total votes were twice Jimmy Rollins. You're showing it here. Do you think it's safe to say that voters who reveal their ballots before Election Day are kind of new school voters, and voters who don't reveal until after Election Day or don't reveal at all are more old school voters? I think it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so with those new school voters, Chase Utley almost had 3 times as many votes as Jimmy Rollins. And then with the old school voters, they were essentially tied. Jimmy had 1 more vote than him. And so that tells you Jimmy's a much more traditional candidate who's got a very unique case. No shortstop who ever lived has had his career with 2,400 hits, 400 steals, 200 homers, 800 extra base hits, MVP, 4 gold gloves, most hits in the history of his franchise. No shortstop who ever played baseball had that career. And so it'll be interesting to see how the conversation about Jimmy evolves. Chase is so data driven, his case, and Jimmy's so old school counting numbers driven. I don't know. There's a case for both, but I think Chase fits where voting is going.
And Jayson, speaking of the Hall of Fame, you and I haven't talked since 2017, so I got to bring this up. 5 years ago, you got the call and received the J.G. Taylor Spink Award for your terrific baseball writing and reporting. Well deserved. I know you've said you wanted to be a sports writer since you were 9 or 10 years old. So what did that honor mean to you?
It's really hard to put into words how overwhelming that whole experience was. My induction weekend, I shared it with Mariano Rivera and Mike Messina and Edgar Martinez and the late, great Roy Halladay. So got to know the Halladay family very well in that time. And I'm not them. I'm not. So I told Jim Tomei he hit 600 more home runs than I hit. But that isn't how those guys treated me. They treated me like I was one of them, like I was a Hall of Famer. And it was amazing. The whole experience was just amazing. We had over 100 friends and family come all the way to Cooperstown, New York, just for me. So just that side of alone was overwhelming. But experiencing it in the way I did, like I was sitting in this room getting ready to go give my Hall of Fame speech. And the greatest players who ever lived were in this room. And also I was there. Okay. And so at one point I looked around and realized who was around me. And I thought, whoa, I'm having a little trouble breathing here. So I got up, kind of stood in the corner, looked around and thought, I need to take a walk. So the men's room was down the hall. So I started walking down the hall, and Jeff Bagwell starts walking with me. He says, "How are you doing?" So I said, "Oh, Jeff, I'm doing great. I'm looking around the room at who else is in the room and thinking, what am I doing here?" He said, "Oh yeah, I think the same thing." I said, "Wait a second. You feel the same way? You realize you're a Hall of Famer, right?" He said, "Oh yeah, I know, but I'm not a Hall of Famer the way those guys are Hall of Famers." Yeah. And so that really helped relax me. Other players think of the legends as legends. They have a hard time understanding that, like, they can now walk into that building in Cooperstown and like their plaque is up there. Like, you can walk into the Hall of Fame, head for the writer's wing, and there I am. Mm-hmm. So that was a crazy weekend. That winter, my wife and I went back and we went and looked, and there was they hadn't taken it down. I was still there. And we looked at each other and thought, wow, this really happened. And Chet, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know what your concept of forever is. I have a hard time grasping that. But people walking through the Hall of Fame in 50 years or 100 years or 500 years or however long there is a Hall of Fame, like, they're going to see me if they're interested in my profession. And it's just staggering to try to imagine that happened to me in my actual life.
I love it. Follow Jayson on Twitter, aka X. Read him in The Athletic, and check out the Starkville podcast he does with Doug Glanville, one of The Athletic's many great podcasts on there. Jayson Stark, thank you, and enjoy the baseball season.
Chet, thank you for having me. You too.